So next up, podcast listeners, the Washington Post lays off a bunch of employees, apparently up to 10% of their employees. Yes, up to 10%. So the WAPO, otherwise known as Washington Post staffers, erupted in complete disagreement and disgust in a town hall meeting at the Washington Post after the publisher of the Post announces layoffs. So the staff at WAPO erupted Wednesday, which was yesterday, after the publisher, Fred Ryan, refused to take questions from staff after announcing layoffs. The Washington Post chief spokesperson, Kathy Baird, confirmed that an unspecified number of positions will be eliminated. You got to love that when you work for a company, to be fair, right? And the head honchos come out and they're like, an unspecified number of persons will be eliminated. And you're like, well, that's really helpful. How am I supposed to plan? You know? And Christmas is only like less than 2 weeks away. So this is your liberal Washington Post for you, right? So, quote, we anticipate it will be a single-digit percentage of our employee base. And, like 9.99%. And we will finalize those plans over the coming weeks. This will not be a net reduction in Post headcount, though. So let me get this straight. You're cutting employees up to 10% of the Washington Post, but you won't have a net reduction in the Washington Post headcount? Right. The News, Washington Post, will conduct layoffs in the coming year, says Oliver Darcy. Publisher Fred Ryan told staffers in a town hall, at least sources have told me. Ryan indicated the cuts will be in single digits of the workforce. He also said the total head count will not shrink by the end of next year. Yeah. So why does this matter? Matters because if you actually have a really good quality newspaper with true investigative journalism and honest journalists who report the story, you will make a lot of money, I am convinced. And here is this legacy newspaper, the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, which has been a complete rag prior to him buying it, quite frankly, and it's only gotten worse since he's bought it. And people aren't buying what they have to sell. So they have to lay people off. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is National Bill of Rights Day, December 15th, and freedom of speech matters. So I want the Washington Post to continue, of course, because it is an iconic newspaper, and it could be a great newspaper if they actually cared about true journalism, which they don't. So unlike my opponents on the left who believe that free speech should be eliminated, that is to say, conservative speech should be eliminated, so they believe, I don't want speech on the left to be eliminated. I want them to be able to say what they want to say. And they usually say it through places like the Washington Post and the New York Times and the mainstream media and the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, all left-wing newspapers. But they're all cutting staff. And they don't get the memo. They don't understand what's happening. Like, why aren't people reading what we're writing? Well, because what you're writing isn't a reflection of what's happening. And people aren't stupid. After a while, you can fool them sometimes, but not all the time. So Fred Ryan, the publisher of the Washington Post, had this town hall at the Post headquarters. And at the headquarters, there were a whole bunch of employees, as you can imagine. I think the entire staff of the Post was there. And it looked like a couple hundred people. Difficult to tell, but a lot of people because it was an auditorium. And he gets in front of them and tells them about this layoff that's intended. Remember, it's called a town hall. He called it a town hall, the publisher, Fred Ryan. But he wouldn't allow anyone to ask questions. It was just one of those, here is the way it's going to be. See you later. And he like darts out as people are trying to ask him questions. Like, well, wait a minute. I thought this was going to be a town hall. Because the town hall is when you actually have an exchange of ideas and questions. It's like, yeah, welcome to the Washington Post, right? We don't want to hear what you have to say. It's not what we want to hear. And so the other observation, too, watching this, and if you're not watching it, that's why I'm explaining it, is that a whole bunch of their employees in this auditorium are wearing masks. Now, don't you find it funny, ladies and gentlemen? Perhaps maybe a better word is ironic. Don't you find it ironic that people who are supposed to be writing for a newspaper, so-called journalists at the Washington Post, supposedly really working to keep free speech alive at a major newspaper in the United States, are wearing masks, right? Because to me, a mask is a symbol of shut up. That's what a mask means to me. It does. It does. The Speaker of the House of Delegates in the state of Maryland, where I serve, made us this year, during the 90-day legislative session, wear masks. It was mandatory. I saw that as shut up, don't talk. Because that's exactly what it is. It was never about protecting people. It was always about shut up. So there you have journalists, ironically, at the Washington Post, a whole bunch of them wearing masks, which is, without question, in my mind, a symbol of shut up, don't talk. So here is a clip with the Washington Post publisher, Fred Ryan, at his town hall, and you can hear him speaking, and then you can hear his employees really upset. We have that clip, and here it is.
Your staff has some questions right now.
We have questions.
And I think because we're journalists, you should answer them, because we're a news organization that values transparency, and this is our only opportunity.
No, you have multiple opportunities. As representatives of the Guild, we have representatives from the Post. You meet every week, you're meeting tomorrow. We're not going to turn the town hall.
This isn't only about the Guild.
Turn the town hall into a grievance session for the Guild. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Questions.
Brad, you talked about positions getting eliminated. What are you going to do to protect people's jobs? Are they going to be treated like the magazine staffers were? Are you going to try and
We'll have
prioritize?
more information as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Is this
You
seem to be disrespecting this room. You are disrespecting this room.
I can't believe this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. He just walked out.
Don't you guys find this funny? What's funny is not that people are going to lose their jobs. Okay, I want to make that crystal clear. What is funny, however, is that you have these employees at the Washington Post who are upset that they're being silenced during a town hall. You know, silence, you can't ask any questions. That's not the purpose of a town hall, says the publisher of the Washington Post. And like, well, what? Why can't we ask questions? It's like, well, wait a minute, Washington Post journalists. Welcome to the First Amendment. Welcome to the First Amendment, because that's exactly what we've been saying about you. We've been saying about you, you won't let us ask questions. And now you're not allowed to ask them to your own publisher. How does that feel?
Why don't they act like that when the president walks away?
That's right, exactly. That was the other. It's so funny, Chris. That was my observation too, which is when they're in the White House press room with Jean-Pierre, and the president's there too, and the president starts talking, and they ask him questions, and he refuses to answer a question. Why don't they do the same thing to him, which is, Mr. President, I don't understand why you think it's constitutional to allow the federal government to pay off 6 million student loans without Congress actually passing a bill saying you can do it. Wait a minute, Mr. President, don't walk out. This question matters. It's unconstitutional. Do you not care about the Constitution? Washington Post journalists would never do that. Ever. Instead, they've spent the past 3 years telling you, average American, to shut up. Don't talk about COVID. Don't talk about anything that has to do with lockdowns. Shut up. Don't go to church because they're locked down too. Don't go to work. Shut your business down. We're going to censor you. We're not going to ask any critical questions about whether any of the COVID policies were a violation of your constitutional rights, let alone the Bill of Rights, which obviously is part of the Constitution. And so that's what I find ironic about this, is the Washington Post publisher who basically announces almost 10% of the people are going to lose their jobs, and he does so within 2 weeks of Christmas. At the same time, in a town hall that he established as a town hall in person, tells his journalists, I'm not here to hear grievances. I'm not here to answer questions either. This is a place of journalism. I can't answer questions. So look, I don't want to see newspapers go out of business. Too many have already gone out of business. What I want to see them do instead is actually be real newspapers. That's all I'm asking. That's all anyone should be asking. And I bet you that room of journalists went home and not one of them saw the irony of what had just happened between how they have comported themselves as journalists for years and what this guy, the publisher, did to them. So it's okay for them to tell us to shut up, don't talk, you should be censored. But no, it's not okay for the publisher to do it to them because they're special as they wear their masks. I'm sorry. It's just so ironic. So here's the thing. Here's something that's interesting that I learned recently, and I should have known it already, but I didn't, to be frank with you. And that is, there are a lot of independent journalists across America, and this part I did know, and some work for Substack, or some have a Substack, and they work for themselves. Others are just great journalists, and they have their own websites and their own papers that they have created. And to the extent that you like some of these investigative journalists, and you're going to find some of them are going to be left of center, but actually are honest. And some are going to be right of center and are actually honest and are going to do critical thinking reporting. Well, there's a widget that allows you to actually tip many of these journalists online. Tip them. Not give them a tip, like, oh, I have a tip for you. It's a really good scoop. Not a scoop, but actual money. You can actually give them money. And by the way, it doesn't have to, I'm not talking about $100. I'm talking about $1, right? But imagine if in the United States of America, in order to be able to save true investigative journalism and to be able to firm up the First Amendment in the United States of America, that we, the people, maybe let's say 80 million of us, each of us gave $1 a month to that single journalist that we really, really liked. And we tipped them online because that widget does exist in many different platforms. And if you did that and that money went directly to the journalist, not to the company, you were rewarding and showing respect to the journalists for the hard work that they did, because these folks make like no money. It's just so you know. They make very little money, which is why so few people want to become journalists, which is why we have so many bad journalists. I mean, there was a time when there was true investigative journalism in the United States, and it was very thorough, and you knew who those people were, and that's where you went when you really wanted to know what was going on. And you would listen to different, sides, of course, as we would like to do now. That's gone. So what we're left with now are individuals who write because they like to do so, or we're left with places like the Washington Post or the New York Times or the mainstream media who have no interest in writing anything in depth about anything. It's all superficial. So when you do find that journalist, whoever that may be, that writes articles not that you politically necessarily agree with, but that you respect because you can tell they did a lot of research and gave you a lot of depth and historical knowledge about an issue of the day, and then let you make your own decision about that issue because they gave you so much background information. Tip them $1. And if 80 million people did that a month, think about that. That only cost you $12 a month, $12 a year, $12 a year. And if 80 million people did that, I mean, my God, that's real money. And that will save journalism in the United States, because journalism, in my opinion, is completely and utterly gone and broken from these large conglomerate companies and or big tech companies, whether it be the Washington Post, New York Times, as I've already mentioned, or whether it be, some of these platforms like Facebook, where you can post, you can put a story on your website and you can post it on Facebook, or you can blog and then put it on Facebook, or any other place where Google, of course, forget it. They just take all of your money, period. They're the ones who have gutted journalism, as are, a lot of bad journalists. But this is an interesting aside. And I really wanted to bring this up to you folks out there in podcast land, because I believe that tipping journalists, that is the way forward to saving the First Amendment in the United States and saving true investigative journalism, which will also save our country. Because when you don't know about something, and you all know this out there very well, when you don't know about a story, you probably will vote when you go to the polls and vote. Had you known about a story, it may have changed your vote. Well, the left knows this, which is why they're not reporting stuff. They're very good at this. They're very good at censorship. I mean, this is how the left remains in power. They remain in power by not telling you stuff, by keeping you ignorant and uninformed. That's the only way they can stay in power, because we know that their ideas are bankrupt and have been throughout history. And so we can actually take back journalism, we the people, by tipping journalists and at the same time rewarding those journalists so that we actually have the truth getting out there. And to be very clear, when you are a journalist and you are writing a story, it's very hard for people to see that story, because you know that you're being algorithmed out, which is really the point that I was making before. So we also need to find a way for people to actually know where to find you, because we know that Google will do everything it can to stop people from seeing what you're writing, especially if it involves critical thinking. God forbid. So let's say this about the Washington Post and the layoffs. Just to close out this segment, I don't want to see people lose their jobs. Certainly not before Christmas. It's the worst possible time. But if you actually were a real paper, Washington Post, you'd be gaining jobs, because that's what Substack is doing, right? You got all these Substacks and people creating their own Substacks, and they're writing and they're being tipped accordingly. And that seems to be the future. That really seems to be the future, if not the present, of true journalism. I just hope it grows and grows and grows. And I hope more of the American people find out about this.